My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I want to talk about TikTok, and I want to talk about its effect on our society and how it may cause social contagions. And along the way, I'm also going to read an article about TikTok. Now, let me say this right up front. TikTok in and of itself should not be a problem. However, when we're looking at a society where we have a bunch of young kids that are not loved the way they should be, they're not supported the way that they should be, and people in general are just not well adjusted, and we live in a profoundly sick society, what happens is something like TikTok can enhance and magnify all the problems that we're already seeing in our society. I'll give you an example. Let's say you took an apple and you threw it in the middle of 3 hungry homeless people. What you're going to see is a lot of negative behaviors here. But do we blame the apple for those behaviors? Or do we blame the individuals themselves? Or we can actually blame a society that we're having difficulty feeding our own people when supposedly we have the richest country in the world. I'll give you another example. Alcohol. A lot of people think alcohol is a problem. I think it's a liquid that sits in a bottle or a can on a shelf somewhere. It's neutral. It has no bearing either way, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. The only time alcohol becomes bad, supposedly, is with the person who gives it that power. And a person may overuse and abuse alcohol due to their lack of coping skills, and they're trying to neutralize negative emotions in them because they don't have good coping skills or they don't have meaning and purpose in their life. So is it an alcohol problem or is it a human being problem? It's a human being problem. Let's look back to the 80s just for a second. There were video games. There were a lot of video games. There were arcades all over the place. Did it destroy our society? No, because children, for the most part back then, were cared about a little bit more. And they didn't have parents that let them play for 7 or 8 hours a day on video games like we're seeing now. The average kid today spends about 7 hours per day on some type of screen, which is crazy when you think about it, because if you sleep 8 hours a day and you're going to school for most of the day, what are they doing? Basically, they're just sitting there and their parents are letting them look at a screen all day, every day. And then we're going to blame technology. Now, I've gone over this over. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some negatives with technology for sure. But the real problem is that our society is so profoundly sick that anything you throw into this society will magnify all of the problems. So I mentioned a term before, social contagion. So let's define that so we're all on the same page. A social contagion is the spread of an affect, attitudes, or behavior through a group of people. Now you can look at it like, say, COVID-19, where it's contagious, but this spreads in more of an emotional and a behavioral way. When we're looking at TikTok, what we're looking at is about 33% of the people who spend the most time on TikTok are between 10 to 19 years old. 2 major issues here that I think are very much worth talking about. Number 1, 10-year-olds spending that much time on TikTok, that should never happen. They probably shouldn't be on there at all. That's number 1. And this whole TikTok thing, I was introduced to it, I think about in 2017. I had 2 or 3 girls as patients that were about 8 to 9 years old at that time, and they kind of introduced me to this. And I went on there to take a look at it, and I thought, well, I didn't realize how bad this could be over time, but we're starting to notice a lot of negative effects. The other interesting thing to note about this, besides that young people should not be on this all day long, is the fact that they lump in 10-year-olds and 19-year-olds into the same cohort. Now, Some of the latest studies have shown or indicated that your average 19-year-old today has about the emotional maturity of a 10-year-old that was alive in the 70s and 80s. So if we look at that, even the people doing these studies now, they're understanding that your average 19-year-old is extremely immature. Just to give it some context, if we go back to the 70s, you can take an average 19-year-old or a 19-year-old that had maybe, say, 10 years of competitive organized sports. They've had multiple sexual relationships, and they could have went off and fought in the Vietnam War for 2 years, come home, be married, and maybe have a baby on the way, all by the time they're 19 years old. And now, many 19-year-olds are spending 7 hours a day playing video games. And yes, it points to the fact that we live in a profoundly sick society. And if you throw TikTok into this, it's going to create more and more problems. So let's continue with this, but I'm going to read an article and then I'm going to play off of that article a little bit. The title of this article is How TikTok Has Become a Dangerous Breeding Ground for Mental Disorders. And starting off, there's a picture of a girl, and the caption underneath says, video sharing app TikTok is flooded with mental illness posts that often encourage healthy teen girls to diagnose the disorders in themselves. Let's start the article. A new group of social media stars are surging on TikTok, mental health influencers. Most of them are teen girls and young women who post videos of themselves experiencing symptoms like Tourette's tics or rapid switches from one personality to another due to borderline personality disorder. Again, the article is already starting off a little bit incorrect. A borderline personality disorder doesn't have anything to do with somebody switching personalities. It has everything to do with emotional dysregulation, but let's move on from there. Others, often without any medical credentials, post videos that help viewers self-diagnose their own medical conditions. So I don't know if it's going to say this in the article, but your average, or I shouldn't say average, your top TikTok influencers, they tend to be in the mental health field, let's say. Number one, they're under 25 years old. That's number one. Number two, they're driven by social media fame, and they're not doing this really to help people. I mean, there might be, but if you had any intelligence at all and you knew that you had no background whatsoever in mental health, you would know that you're not doing this to help people. You would guide people straight to the professionals. And that's the third thing that they have in common, these influencers. They're not professionals, most of them. And the most popular ones are the ones that can show that they're the most dysfunctional. So again, this is an absolute race to the bottom here, and it's becoming very trendy to be dysfunctional. It's almost like having a mental health disorder and not being able to handle your life. That's the new status symbol right now, and people are seeing this, and this is what creates the social contagion. Moving on. These videos are getting billions of views. On TikTok alone, the hashtag BPD, which is borderline personality disorder, has 3.7 billion views. Hashtag bipolar, 2 billion views. And DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, has another 1.5 billion. Let's just take it from that for a second. So I am a mental health clinician, and I know a lot of other mental health clinicians. And I've been around mental health clinicians for over 10 years. Do you know what the prevalence of these things are when you're seeing billions of views? We're looking at dissociative identity disorder. The prevalence is about 1%. That's it. I'll give you an example. As a professional and a person who's around professionals, I don't know anybody that's ever had DID. And any of the professionals that I work with, I don't know any of them that have diagnosed anybody with DID. It's that rare. You never see it. But on TikTok, billions of views. And I did watch it, some of these videos, just to know what I'm really seeing here. And I don't want to be flippant in any way, because I know people are going through some difficult things, but it's almost, it seems like they're a bunch of comedians. Like they're making up stuff. Like they'll video themselves and they're saying, I'm dissociating now. Can't you see me the way I drive? And they video themselves driving. And when you drive, a lot of people, they do that you drive somewhere that you've driven to hundreds of times, and you don't look at all the street signs, you just drive. And somebody's like comparing that to having a disorder. Like there's so many things on there that make no sense. There's 10-year-old girls on there posting things about how their personalities change from one to the other, and then they change their voices on camera right on time, and then they switch again and they're wearing different clothes to act like their personalities change. I mean, it's this big disgusting thing that we've seen since, I would say, the late 90s, where there was a writer's strike on TV, and I guess all the powers that be didn't want to pay the writers anymore, so they decided to make everything to be a reality show. So now we started making people off the street famous for doing nothing and being nothing, you know, like the Kardashians. And it's like we're seeing this on TikTok. All these people are putting on these big flashy shows about mental health, and they don't know a thing about it, and they're playing the parts of all these people. And it's so disturbing to see. By the way, in order to diagnose something like DID, it takes a professional about 7 years. So if you're gonna watch a 30-second TikTok video and do this, come on, man. Like, this is just insane how sick our society is. Let's continue. Bipolar, prevalence of that, you almost never see that either. It's about 2.5%, and it takes about 5 to 10 years to diagnose. So we're talking about professionals here to do that. BPD, a borderline personality disorder, again, it's relatively rare. You'd look at about 2%, that's about it. And again, that takes a fairly long time to be able to diagnose. And even if you did diagnose, you know, do you need the diagnosis to be able to treat that emotional dysregulation from unresolved trauma? I mean, it's just crazy. The other one that they talk about here a lot is Tourette's. Like all these girls are getting Tourette's now, and they want to be able to diagnose that. I have never diagnosed somebody with that. And most clinicians I know have not. The prevalence of that is less than 1%. So how all of these things are having billions of views, it's just a massive social contagion over nothing. That's what the problem is here. I was watching this one about BPD, and this, I don't know, 11-year-old girl was saying, this is what borderline personality disordered people say. Things like, I'm fine, I don't know, I'm sorry, I feel a little weird, I hate you. Listen, that is not a professional assessment. I think everybody in the world says, I'm fine, or I don't know, or I'm sorry. Like, what, are you kidding me? That's a professional diagnosis? I'll never understand this. Before I read this article a little bit more, let's be honest about what a mental health clinician has to go through, right? So you got 2 years of associates. In order to get your 4-year degree, right, your bachelor's, again, it takes about 4 years, but that's what we say. But if you're paying for your own school like I did, it took me 7 years, but that's a whole nother story. So let's just say it's 4. Then you go into graduate school, and they tell you you have 2 years of graduate school. Then you could be a therapist. And that's a complete lie. Because when you do the first 2 years, that's okay, but then you have the externship part, where now you have to work for free. And if I remember right, it's about 15 to 20 hours a week that you're working for free for about another year. So that's 3 years by the time you actually get out of the school and you get your your diploma that you graduated. What can you do with that diploma? Absolutely nothing. That's the answer. Because after you graduate, well, the externship is about 500 hours of clinical hours, which you don't get paid for. Now you still have to put in about another 2,500 hours, where you do get paid, but you get paid almost nothing. How long does it take you then to get through that, to get your hours? Well, you're only allowed to count 20 hours per week. So if you work 50 weeks a year for 20 hours, you're looking at 1,000 hours that you can put in for. So you're looking at 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years minimal to be able to get through all the requirements that you need. Then from there, now you have to pass the state exam. So when you really get down to this, what you're looking at is about over 10 years worth of concerted, hard studying. And many of those hours you're working with no pay before you can actually take on your first real client as a licensed mental health clinician. But we're looking at 10-year-old girls who are self-diagnosing and diagnosing other people. It's safe to say that there are many psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed marriage and family therapists, and they are not even close to being the mental health influencers as many 10 and 11 and 12-year-old girls are on TikTok. And that's the truth. And what does that mean? It means, again, we live in a profoundly sick society. I mean, there's no way that that should be happening. Let's move on. Let me read more of this article here. Recently, psychologists have noticed a wave of adolescent girls also claiming to suffer from Tourette's syndrome and rare mental health conditions, such as borderline disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia. I just went over that. And they are not typically seen in the teenage demographic. As a common denominator between many of these symptomatic girls has been identified, consuming mental health content on TikTok. In one case, this girl's name, I guess I shouldn't read it on here, but let's see. Well, let me just read. In one case, Caroline Olvera of Rush University Medical Center in Chicago researched numerous girls with tics, all blurting out the word beans in English accents, even some who didn't speak English. As it turns out, a British Tourette's influencer with over 14 million followers manifested the exact same beans tic. So here we have non-professional girls, 14 million subscribers. How many do I have? I don't know, I have 6,000. After nearly 2 years of lockdowns and school closures, lonely teens are spending more time online, and many inevitably come across mental health content on TikTok. When they do, the platform's algorithm kicks in, serving suggestible young girls even more videos on the topic. While mental health awareness is surely a good thing, well-meaning influencers are inadvertently harming young, impressionable viewers, many of whom seem to be incorrectly self-diagnosing with disorders or suddenly manifesting symptoms because they are now aware of them. The only thing I would correct here is I don't think that they're well-meaning. If you were well-meaning and had any intelligence whatsoever, you would send somebody to a professional. You wouldn't be a 13-year-old girl influencing people on here. But they make a lot of money. That's the other part. The TikTok mental health explosion is clearly a modern version of social contagion that we've spoken about, which has always been more prevalent among teen girls than other demographic groups, said Dr. Jean Twenge, professor of psychology at San Diego State University and author of iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. Eating disorders have also been shown to be spread within friend groups. As a member of Gen Z, I've watched firsthand what social media has done to the generation of young women. It even left behind self-harm scars on many of their peers' wrists. I know a terrifying number of peers who have self-harmed, many of whom were habitual social media users. Again, the only thing I would correct here is that it's a very superficial way of looking at things to say that what social media has done to a generation of young women. I would admit, as I have in the other shows, that young people should be nowhere near any of this social media garbage. However, it's still an extremely weak and dysfunctional society that's creating this. Rates of depression have doubled among teen girls between 2009 and 2019, and self-harm hospital admissions have soared 100% for girls aged 10 to 14 during the rise of social media between the years 2010 and 2014. But let me say, we're almost the year 2023, so these numbers are way off. They're way higher than what they're saying here. They're way worse. The rise of poor mental health, along with the ubiquity of smartphones, has led to its own frightening epidemic. They're also leaving out really horrible parenting, but that's another story. Gone are the days of showing the highlight reel of your best life on Instagram. Now it's trendy to celebrate your worst moments. What attracts eyeballs in today's social media market is tears, and content creators are incentivized to be vulnerable for views. So far, there is no solution to this crisis. Again, here's where they start to bend. There is a solution. These kids should be nowhere near this social media, like I've said in all these shows. They're trying to find a middle ground, and there really isn't one. The answer doesn't lie with clueless politicians attempting to regulate big tech, and certainly not with the companies themselves. Yeah, of course not, because we don't want to get in the way of the money, because we live in a capitalistic country. So let's put money before people, right? That's what we're talking about here, which is, I don't agree with that at all. Nor should we discourage public conversation about mental health problems. Rather, parents, especially those of adolescent girls, need to be the first line of defense against social media's harmful effects. Unlike texting friends and playing video games, social media is entirely inappropriate for children and tweens. Let me add to that. It says, unlike texting friends and playing video games, social media is entirely inappropriate. First of all, I think texting friends all the time is not good either. It's not good practice. I wouldn't allow that. If you have real friends, you should be talking to them. At least call them. It would be better off to see them, of course. But having kids grow up throughout all their early development and all they're doing is texting people is one of the reasons why they live in complete anxiety when it comes to social connections. Big tech platforms themselves prohibit those under 13 from creating social media accounts. Abiding by that rule and staving off social media use for even longer is the best way to prevent these tragic mental health outcomes. Well, I'm glad they actually agree with me on that one. Dr. Twenge urges parents to keep girls off social media until 16, if possible. She's not the only one who says that. She also advises to leave your phone outside your bedroom while you're sleeping. Make sure your kids do the same and put down all electronic devices an hour before bedtime. I find that a little bit weird too, to act like they should even have all these devices, like it's something that's so desperately needed by them. It's like having, it's their drug. So again, I just think we're elevating some of the social media stuff to a level where they shouldn't be. Kids don't need any of this, actually. The bottom line, once the land of silly dances and kitten videos, TikTok is now a breeding ground for mental disorders. The evidence that social media is harmful to young mental health is both mounting and damning, and it's time that Gen Z and their parents started taking notice. And that I definitely agree with. Again, this TikTok is now a breeding ground for mental disorders. Yes, it looks that way, and I definitely agree with that. However, you want to know what the breeding ground for all these mental disorders is? It's our society. It's our culture. It's already in there. If it's not TikTok, it's something else, right? You throw a bunch of drugs to a bunch of people that have no meaning and purpose in their life, and they're going to go to the drugs. It's not the drug's fault. It's an inanimate object. We have an obesity problem in this country. Is it the food's fault? No, you don't have to eat it. You don't have to buy it. It's the same thing with anything. It's in the human. It's about being accountable. It's about having responsibilities. It's about decisions. And it all comes from there. So that's some of my thoughts about TikTok, 25-minute video. Most people who watch TikTok would not be able to watch this because they want it done in 30 seconds, but that's okay. My name is Joe Peroni. I hope you found this valuable, and please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.